You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Kay from Ross Kay Realty Consultants. Welcome to the show, Ross.
Thanks for having me back, Jim.
Today we're discussing what are the real numbers. The Canadian Real Estate Association has put out its monthly numbers, and people have been emailing you. How come your numbers don't match theirs?
Yeah, it's I don't know why at the end of the year clients come back and they ask why are our numbers so different, why they're not doing it on an ongoing basis. I suspect the errors that in the reporting of numbers probably shows up more at the end of the year when you've got 11 months of data up till November added in, Jim. So if someone was to look at the release from the Canadian Real Estate Association, the release that has all the numbers in. Okay, so if you can't find a copy, they used to publish that for public access on the MLS HPI tool in the news release, but they started when my complaints over the misreporting of information happened. We might have discussed this on your show. The Canadian Real Estate Association decided they would quit releasing the numbers to the public. So the public, when you go to MLS HPI now, if you pull off an old one from 2012 and then you pull off a new one from 2015, you'll see what I mean. The number section is deleted from the new one. So in order to get the number section today, you pretty much have to get a hold of a realtor, or you have to subscribe to it from CMHC, from the Canadian Real Estate Association.
So what is the association saying has happened in the last year, and what are you saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that people wonder how we are able to read a housing market exactly in turn with what's happening in the marketplace. In other words, how did we know last July that the housing market in Calgary had turned? How did we know that back in May of 2013, first-time buyers had begun to leave the market? How come we know how many foreign buyers are possibly purchasing homes in Vancouver? Why are housing prices inflating the way they are? How big is a housing bubble? I think the reason people haven't had a chance to understand this, on top of not being directly involved in the industry to know how it works, has a lot to do with the numbers they're supplied. Because this habit of backdating numbers and then reissuing them at a different number at another time, that really confuses the market. Because often we're looking at very small changes. We need to know those small changes because a market is either accelerating up to its peak, or it is decelerating towards its trough. A real estate market is never level. It never goes up and down. As a matter of fact, the only time in the last 30 years where there was one little tiny glitch in all of the home sales registered in Canada was last December, because the market had turned negative, and then the following month the bank had dropped interest rates, and the slowdown that was started was stopped from happening. So you really need to follow these numbers down within a 1,000 count. Your accuracy level has to be within 1,000 on 500,000 sales. So that's the required accuracy level that you need to have. If you look at the Canadian Real Estate Association numbers that are released to the public, The Economist, CMHC, everyone else, it's a mumble jumble of numbers. One real estate board releases it one way, another real estate board releases it another. And that's impossible for someone to sit back and try to analyze what's going on with the market if that's the data that you're holding in your hand. If you review the CMHC's version of the Canadian Real Estate Association numbers against the Canadian Real Estate Association's own numbers against what the local real estate board releases, you're going to find there's three different sets of numbers. So unless you know which numbers are the right ones to read, there is no way that you're ever going to know what's happening in a real estate market. Let's look at Toronto right now. The province of Ontario has seen a $33,696 increase in their average selling price this year. So if you live in the province of Ontario, the Canadian Real Estate Association is saying that home prices have increased that amount. That amount equates to a 7.8% increase. Well, in Toronto alone, just in the GTA, they're bordering on a 10% increase. Our numbers show that they're at basically a 9.69% increase in the average selling price. So since that makes up 45% of all sales that take place in Ontario, if you extrapolate that out into the CREA numbers, what they're saying is that the rest of Ontario, outside of the what Toronto Real Estate Board encompasses, which is only 45% of the market share, is what they're reporting. Your average selling price will have only increased in the neighborhood of about 5%. Now that would be nice if you looked out and you reviewed the real estate boards in Ontario, and they showed some numbers that reflected that, but they don't. You can drive right down the highway to Ottawa or to Oakville. The number shows substantially higher. If you can drive right down to Hamilton, Burlington, their number shows like at 8%. You can drive further down the highway to St. Catharines, the Niagara Falls area, and I think they're showing a 7.8% increase. So what I'm saying is, it is a mathematical impossibility for the average sale price in Ontario to have increased 7.8% if Toronto has already increased almost 10. It's just a mathematical impossibility. So consumers are using this information. The newspapers are reporting on it. And even though it may only be out 2, 3, 4%, that 2, 3, 4% on a $400,000 purchase is $16,000. So $16,000 is a lot of money. How much money is $16,000? Let's drive over to Calgary now, because this is really relevant to the Calgary market. Calgary has watched their housing prices decrease $16,000 on average this year. So if someone owned a home in Calgary last year in November, they walked into the same bank this November, the bank would look at them and say if they had purchased an average home in Calgary that had sold, the bank would be telling them that they have $16,000 in fewer after-tax dollars available to them. They've lost $16,000 on average. When you transpose that number across the entire housing stock that's privately owned in Calgary, that means Calgarians have lost $7 billion in net worth so far this year. $7 billion Calgary homeowners have lost. I think the banks just reported their combined profits for all the Canadian banks this year, Jim, and I think it was a bragging point, and I think they're using it to increase their share value. Do you have any idea what the banks reported? The exact number? It'd be nice if I had a number from you.
Well, the Royal Canadian Bank said they were the first bank ever to record a $3 billion profit. In fact, the first Canadian company to ever report a $3 billion profit. Overall, the banking industry said they made $10 billion in the past year. $10
billion. Okay. So the bank brags about making $10 billion, but there's total silence on the $7 billion lost in Calgary alone on house value. When you take that up to other parts of Calgary, such as Edmonton, Fort McMurray, you're going to find that in total, the $10 billion the banks are talking about profiting from represents basically what Albertans have lost in home equity this year. The banks are all over the news with that number, but the fact that Alberta homeowners have lost a similar number has not appeared in one single newspaper in this country. And this is because people don't understand what's at stake with the housing market in Canada. When you look at the Canadian housing market, you're talking about somewhere around 11 million homes. Now, there's more than that because there's about 3 million rental properties. We don't count rental properties because rental properties are never going to come to market. Rental properties, rental houses where people are renting to live in, those houses are worth what their rents can generate. And what their rents can generate, there's also tax savings on the value of the home. There's a whole bunch of situations where an investment property with a landlord and a tenant, it makes far more sense than it does if you were to own a home, for the sake of the argument, in today's world. So we're going to talk about just those 11 million homes. If the average house price in Canada, which I believe is will end the year at about $440,000. And let's say next year that housing prices correct 2% across the country. So next year we're going to lose 2% of that $440,000 $440,000. That works out to $8,800 per home in Canada. Now, of course, some will be less, some will be more. Obviously, $1 million home is going to leave. We're using, because everybody uses the average, I'm going to use the average in this discussion, $8,800. So for the sake of the argument, let's just round that up to $9,000. Now let's multiply that by 11 million homes.
In other words, you're saying a 2% drop in the average price of a home in Canada would cost the Canadian economy $99 billion, almost $100 billion. That's a hell of a whack.
What my statement is, Jim, is that there is $450 billion in uninsured mortgages held by Canadian National Bank. Those banks claimed to have been making $10 billion in profit. Because the housing bubble has inflated as large as it has, and because we've just demonstrated in Calgary where a $16,000 loss on average equates to $7 billion in net worth loss, you can see the problem that the banks have right now if their house price measure using their loan-to-value ratios, using the National Bank forward sortation area indices, is simply wrong.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after the break.
See singing impressionist Andre Philippe Gagnon.
And I think to myself.
In Oliver, December 29th. In Kelowna, December 30th. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com. Unbelievable harmonies, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon & Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band, Saturday, January 9th at the Alex Goulden Hall. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking to Ross Kay. It's claimed that Vancouver real estate prices went up 17% in the past year, Toronto 15%, and they're saying next year Toronto should see another 5%, Vancouver 7%. Is there any way that estimates like that can be accurate?
What they're saying is that the houses that sold for 17% higher than the houses that sold last year. The misconception that happens, or the mistake that happens, and this is a universal mistake, Jim. This is not just in Canada. This is in the United States. This is around the world. Economists have been struggling with the concept of establishing an accurate house price index. How do we really measure, the economists around the world are saying, how do we really measure house price growth? Well, they can't measure it the way that they're doing. The OCED did a massive study on this. I believe you can download the materials offline. Google Real Property Price Index, OECD, and you'll see their study. It's a wonderful study. It included Canadian economists and representatives of Stats Canada, as a matter of fact. Their conclusions, after all the work that all of these economists did, basically they're just going to end right back up with the average selling price. That's all that they're ending back up with. When you go through the methodologies that they suggest, which is the same methodology, similar methodology to Terranet National Bank at HPI, you still just end up back at the average selling price. The reason you end up at the average selling price is because you're only measuring those houses that sell. So in Canada, each year, less than, now normally, I mean, there's been a few years where it's been over this, but certainly not this year, it's not going to happen. Less than 5% of all homes sell. So we've got 11 million homes in Canada right now. The realtors in Canada are on track to sell around 507,000. So they're going to sell about less than 5 in 100 homes. If you have $400,000 to buy a house and you go and look at 100 houses, you're going to choose the home that is the best house for the money. Nobody goes out and willingly pays more for something when there's a better alternative available that costs them the less or the same. This is how housing bubbles happen and why the 17% increase in Vancouver is irrelevant. If tomorrow you woke up, Jim, and instead of 1% of the housing stock in Vancouver being for sale, 2% was for sale. Instead of 250,000 homes being for sale in Canada, you woke up the next day and you found 500,000 homes for sale. All of a sudden, the average selling price drops, and it drops and will continue to drop until that 5% is restricted to not being the top quality homes that are available.
And actually, Ross, that scenario isn't really unreal because baby boomers, I hear, are expected to drop their expensive big houses and downsize. So a lot of extra property will be for sale.
If boomers had a viable alternative, Jim, right now to move, in other words, if builders and the Government of Canada and CMHC had planned this properly, there would have been viable alternatives for those boomers to move into. The problem you have in Canada today is there's no place for those guys to go. They are not going to move into a condominium in downtown Vancouver because that is not the lifestyle that the most people want. That's not going to take place in the GTA. People like a certain lifestyle. They want to maintain it. They would like to withdraw some equity from their home to enjoy their retirement, but they're not going to do that unless A, there's an option available to them that they see as being a great opportunity in terms of changing their lifestyle, or B, they're forced to move. The current status quo in Canada is that boomers, are staying in their homes, or the early edge of the boomers, until they're forced to sell. In other words, they become disabled, or they're no longer able to take care of their home, or they simply don't have any money to live on day to day. All their money's tied up in their home. So that's the time they have to sell. But because of the house price gains that the banks have been lending money on, these are not real gains, Jim. These are not real gains. These are based on the average selling price. This is what the bank will lend you money on. If you can go and borrow $200,000 against your house, and that will allow you to live for the next 5 years in a pretty good lifestyle, then that's what people are going to do. And that's what they're choosing to do right now, which is why the uninsured mortgage portfolios of the bank is at $450 billion. That's why it's there. That demographic is withdrawing money from their house, and they're using it to live because they say, hey, my house has gone up in price $200,000 in the last 10 years. I don't care. I'll just take that $200,000 out and spend it now. And that's a situation why the boomers are there. So your 17% increase in Vancouver. That is simply a structural issue with Vancouver's housing stock. It is no other reason. It is simply because the planners and the developers in British Columbia have not made proactive decisions that are reflective of how people enjoy and live in their home. They will never make those proper conclusions until they get independent intelligence that tells them otherwise. Currently, that is not available outside of Ross K. Realty Consultants in Canada today. And I know that sounds absurd, but that simply is a matter of fact.
Ross, it sounds like people just, or organizations aren't willing to do the number crunching that you do because you're using the same numbers that they have available. How come your conclusions are different, or are they deliberately refusing to accept reality?
No, I think it's a level of ignorance, Jim, and I'm using that word from an educational standpoint.
They just don't know about them.
They just don't know. So, I've talked about this on your show before. I can ask my 78-year-old dad questions, and my dad will answer them immediately. An economist couldn't even answer the question that my dad just answered because the economist hasn't worked through a housing market. I know that buyers prefer homes that are 10 years old or newer. I know that because I worked in the business for 27 years and my family's been in it for 40. I know that. So I know that the houses that are selling, there is always a higher concentration of homes that are 10 years old or newer that sells. I know that houses that have been built in the last 10 years are all worth whatever today's price is, because that's how a housing market evolves. A builder goes into a subdivision in 2010. He builds phase one. It sells out. He sells it for $350,000 per house. In 2011, he builds phase two. He builds the exact same houses, but now because he's successful, he's going to sell those houses for $400,000. All of the houses in phase one are now worth $400,000 because not only are they the exact same house, but the owners of those homes have put in fences, decks, landscapes, decorated, dishwashers, etc., etc. They've made all the improvements to that one-year-old home. Also with a one-year-old home, you can look at it and decide if that's the house that you want to buy. With a builder, you're often buying from plan. Phase 2 ends. 2012, Phase 3 opens because Phase 2 is sold out. Now the builder raises his price to $450,000 for the exact same house in the exact same subdivision. The homes that were purchased for $350,000 in 2010 are now worth $450,000. That is simply how housing markets roll out. You will not find what I just told you in any printed materials in Canada or North America or on a Google search today.
Ross, how can people find out more information than on their own? Can they go to your website?
They can go to our website, Jim. The most important thing for your listeners, Jim, right now, and our biggest concern, and we've worked on this now for 6 months, we have what's called Equity Preservation and Growth Program for your home. So if you were a homeowner in Canada today, the people in Calgary, if they had been my clients prior to us leaving the real estate business and working as consultants, they could have accessed our program. These programs that we have are individually created for each homeowner because it's the same ones that we created for our own clients for 40 years. You then take the program to your lawyer and to your financial advisor, and they implement it for you. Ross K. Realty Consultants makes not a nickel on whatever decision you make. So we are unbiased, independent. You can trust us because whether you do it or not, it makes no difference to us. Our Home Equity Preservation and Growth Program on the average Canadian home today will earn you an extra $800,000 over the next 30 years versus not doing it. Home equity preservation and growth protects you from a housing bubble correction. If we had this program live and we were selling it in Calgary last year, in other words, we were delivering the program, it's like $999, Jim. It's not like it's a big cost. Those people, the $16,000 that they lost this year would have actually been a positive $3,000. You just have to start treating your home as an investment instead of a mattress. You wouldn't take $400,000 and throw it in a mattress. Why are you taking $400,000 and throwing it in the mattress that's in your home, which is exactly what you're doing today? Take proactive action to protect yourself and your family. Your listeners can go out tomorrow and protect themselves.
Ross, great advice and best of the season.
Same to you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross K. from Ross K. Realty Consultants, and that website where you can find that home equity preservation and generating income plan is rossk.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com Radio. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com Radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.